What's good, YouTube? In this video, we'll be taking a look at switching from Android to iOS, or the other way around, from iOS to Android in 2022. If you like this kind of content, leave a message down below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching. So, with the upcoming flagship release cycle, you might be asking yourself if this is the year you want to upgrade your phone. And if you're running Android, you certainly have a lot more choices. But Apple has really spiced things up over the last few years with some pretty major changes to iOS that have certainly closed the gaps between things like customization, app availability, and certain core components and features. That being said, however, there's still some pretty large differences between the two operating systems, and the overall experience from Android and iOS is still largely two separate things. This video will go over some of the major differences and the current status in terms of the core components of each of these platforms. Things like Siri versus Google Assistant, the controls and customizations of iOS versus Android, the flexibility of iOS versus Android, and other specific features like voice to text and app customization. Some of these features might seem minor, but everyone uses their own smartphone differently, and if one of these features are a part of your daily use of your smartphone, then the decision between Android and iOS is a major one, as there's some pretty large differences between the experiences of things like Google's Assistant's control over smart devices or Siri's control over smartwatches, most notably being the Apple Watch. Android and iOS are indeed tied into their respective software and hardware ecosystems. However, there's still core components of the smartphone experience that both do very similarly and also very differently than each other. This feature that we'll go over here is Google Assistant versus Siri. Google Assistant has really had the lead over the past few years for its comprehensive integration of Google's search and other services into the voice assistant. When you can input very specific and very well executed voice commands into things like Google Home and also Google Maps, it makes it hard to compete with, as Apple really doesn't have the same reach in terms of their other services. If you're talking about the core voice functions like setting alarms or controlling basic functions of the smartphone, Apple has really stepped it up over the last couple of iterations in terms of making Siri just as fast and just as easy as Google Assistant. If you want to set an alarm or if you want to do a voice dictated search, then Siri and Google Assistant are pretty close to each other in terms of both speed and ease of use. But if you want to do some more advanced and specific things like change your active route on Google Maps navigation, or specifically turn off a set of lights that you pre-programmed on your Google Home, then it's really hard to beat the Google Assistant, as there's carefully coded commands that you can use to program your voice assistant to meet these customizations. Like other things in this comparison, Apple is slowly but surely bridging the gap, and the Siri Shortcuts app that comes preloaded on a lot of iPhones really helps you customize certain aspects of Siri to mimic those features that are found on Google Assistant. At least in terms of the iPhone, there's not really a feature that you can't customize with some of the custom gestures that you can pre-program with Siri. And Apple has really come a long way since the beginning days of Siri, where voice commands were somewhat clumsy and few and far between. Give it a few more generations for Apple to catch up both in terms of the software and smart home hardware segments. But for the time being, Google Assistant really is the winner over Siri in terms of breadth of function, ease of use, and just sheer speed. The same commands that you can do on Google Assistant are usually faster than can be done on Siri. Siri is no slouch, however, as if you need basic functions and voice commands, you can still have all that on an iPhone. It's just not as good as it is on an Android device for the moment. Next, we'll be moving on to UI and navigation on Android versus iOS. This has long been a point of contention between the two platforms, as this is really where they do diverge in terms of both the approach towards new UI and also navigation. Android has and probably will always be customizable, and either you're getting the customization from the carrier, the manufacturer of the phone itself, or whatever the newest version of Android is. And the thing about Android is that if you don't like whatever skin or customization you got on your device, you can change it. That's the great benefit of running Android. So if you don't like the way a particular widget looks, you can probably find a customization to your liking, no problem. With iPhone, on the other hand, you're stuck with whatever Apple gives you. And iOS has just gotten nicer and nicer looking over the years, and if you don't dislike their whole gesture-based navigation in the first place, then it's pretty easy to like what Apple has to offer in terms of UI design and navigation. The animations when switching between apps, moving up and down an app, are second to none in terms of smartphone game. And in my opinion, the increased screen quality that we've been seeing on iPhones over the years just add to the ease of use of their beautiful iOS operating system. iPhones are really good looking phones, and their operating system is a good looking operating system. Things in general are slick. However, pretty much everyone that I've spoken to that are long-standing Android users find the navigation component on newer iPhones, since the iPhone 10 and Apple doing away with the home button, the hardest part of the switch. With Android, you usually get multitasking, last app, or back buttons that are found somewhere on the UI that are somewhat easy to use and intuitive. This doesn't really exist on an iPhone, and the lack of multitasking altogether, which we'll get into a little bit later in this video, is a deal breaker for some in terms of the UI design, particularly if you're coming from Android. With Apple, if you cannot get used to the gesture-based commands of iOS, then I would not recommend you using an iPhone, especially if you're a long-standing Android user. The learning curve is actually quite steep if you've never used iOS before. And things like going back on a web page, switching between apps, multitasking on apps, or accessing your file directory can be quite hard for long-standing Android users. It's quite frustrating when you're on an iPhone and you have no idea how to navigate a web page or access the files that you've been trying to download. All of this is quite simple and straightforward on Android, and I find that just in general, the learning curve for navigation and usability of UI is much better and has always been much better on Android. And with that, we'll move into the final section of this comparison, which is specialized features. Both of these operating systems offer specialized features in their respective ecosystems that you can't find on the other. With iPhone, you get access to all of Apple's ecosystem and components. If you like iMessages, you can of course only get it on iOS. If you have an Apple Watch, you're going to need an iPhone. If you have a Mac, a MacBook, or any number one of Apple's devices like the new AirTags, then you're going to need the iPhone. In terms of its ecosystem, Apple does a lot of things that Google simply can't compete with. If you're a longtime Mac user, then you'll very likely want the iPhone for all of the syncing and cross-compatibility capabilities that you'll have between the two devices. In the same way, however, Google does also have a pretty solid bench in terms of its own ecosystem. And the biggest things that come to mind are, of course, game streaming. Apple simply can't compete with the streaming services that you have available for mobile gaming on an Android device. And while Apple is slowly catching up, if you're into mobile gaming, there really isn't a substitute for an Android device at the moment. So, in 2022, in terms of the comparison between Android and iOS, the choice really is determined on what you're going to use your smartphone for. If you're already dialed into each of the respective ecosystems, then you probably want to stick with that platform. However, if you've been a long-standing Android user and you don't mind the learning curve associated with trying to learn the navigation and user interface of iOS, then I would strongly recommend you try the switch, particularly if you could find an older model iPhone on a budget. Both are great platforms and both can do things that the others can't. So in order just to maximize the amount of functionality that you're getting out of your tech, I would really recommend that you run both. So what do you think? Are there other arguments to be made for the Android versus iOS battle? Leave a message down below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.